The Nexus station rotated through its artificial day-night cycle with the kind of mechanical precision that would make a Swiss clockmaker weep with envy. If Swiss clockmakers still existed and weren't just historical footnotes in humanity's bizarre rise to galactic prominence. Here, suspended in the gravitational sweet spot between three star systems, representatives from 47 different species gathered to argue about trade routes, territorial disputes, and the eternally contentious question of who got to claim salvage rights when someone's experimental faster-than-light drive inevitably exploded. It was, by all accounts, the pinnacle of civilized discourse in the known galaxy, which made it particularly amusing that the humans had somehow managed to secure a permanent seat at the diplomatic table. The weather control systems had been acting up again, the consequence of having 47 different atmospheric preferences crammed into one station, and today's scheduled precipitation was running at optimal Earth normal parameters, which meant it was raining. Again, the kind of gentle, persistent drizzle that made humans nostalgic for their soggy little homeworld and made everyone else question the species' collective sanity. Helix 7 of the Centauran collective adjusted his biomechanical interfaces with the sort of methodical precision his kind was famous for. His elongated cranium, housing a brain roughly 3 times the size of a human's, processed 17 different data streams simultaneously, while maintaining perfect diplomatic composure. The morning's agenda included a territorial dispute between the Regillian Mining Consortium and the Tau Ceti Defense League, followed by humanity's latest proposal to establish friendship embassies throughout the Outer Rim territory. The humans, bless their illogical little hearts, seemed to believe that declaring something friendly would somehow make it so. As the session commenced, Helix 7 noted the arrival of the human delegation with his usual detached interest. They bustled in with their characteristic chaos, a whirlwind of briefcases, data tablets, and that peculiar human tendency to treat every formal occasion as if they'd just rolled out of bed 5 minutes late. At the center of this organized disaster walked their lead negotiator, a woman whose credentials suggested she was actually competent despite belonging to a species that had discovered interstellar travel entirely by accident. She was unremarkable in the way humans tended to be: 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head positioned exactly where evolution had intended, with none of the elegant modifications that marked truly advanced species. Her dark hair was pulled back in what humans called professional, though Helix 7's aesthetic subroutines registered it as merely functional. She wore the standard diplomatic attire of her people, all sharp angles and muted colors, designed to project authority while somehow managing to look apologetic for existing. But there was something about the way she moved through the chamber that caught his analytical attention. Where other humans bumbled and stumbled over the station's bioadaptive flooring, she navigated with an almost predatory grace. Her eyes, those inefficient organic sensors humans were so proud of, swept the room with the kind of systematic precision that suggested military training, or perhaps just the paranoia that came from representing a species everyone else considered a cosmic joke. The morning's negotiations proceeded with typical diplomatic inefficiency. The Regillians postured about their ancient mining rights, while the Tau Cetians countered with equally ancient claims about defensive necessity. The humans, meanwhile, sat quietly taking notes and occasionally offering suggestions that were either brilliantly insightful or catastrophically naive. With humans, it was often impossible to tell the difference until after the explosion stopped. Helix 7 found himself studying the human negotiator with growing fascination. She had a way of tilting her head when listening that suggested genuine interest, rather than the polite attention most diplomats cultivate. When she spoke, which she did sparingly, her words carried the kind of weight that made even the Regillians pause their endless pontificating. The session broke for lunch with nothing resolved, as was tradition. Species began filing out in their usual hierarchical clusters. The energy beings first, naturally, followed by the hive minds, then the various humanoid variants in order of cranial capacity. The humans, as always, brought up the rear with their endearing mixture of dignity and mild confusion. It was then that Helix 7 noticed her umbrella. The thing sat forlorn and forgotten beside her chair, a simple black cylinder that somehow managed to look accusatory in its abandonment. It was, by human standards, an elegant piece of equipment, collapsible, weather-resistant, and utterly pointless given that the station's environmental controls could be adjusted to eliminate precipitation entirely. Yet humans, with their peculiar attachment to atmospheric drama, insisted on maintaining Earth-normal weather patterns in their quarters. The umbrella's abandonment struck Helix 7 as oddly significant, though he couldn't immediately process. His analytical subroutines began cataloging possibilities: forgetfulness brought on by the morning's diplomatic stress, a deliberate abandonment due to equipment malfunction, or perhaps some obscure human ritual he'd failed to document in his cultural database. As he stood contemplating this minor mystery, the chamber's atmospheric systems cycled into afternoon mode, and the gentle precipitation increased to what humans optimistically called proper rain. Through the transparestial observation ports, he could see other species hurrying through the station's corridors, with the kind of resigned efficiency that came from dealing with humanity's weather obsessions on a regular basis. The human negotiator was nowhere to be seen, presumably having retreated to her quarters to consume whatever nutritional paste humans considered food. Her umbrella remained behind like a forgotten soldier standing its lonely vigil beside an empty chair. Helix 7's practical subroutines suggested simply leaving the device where it lay. Human forgetfulness was hardly his concern, and the woman would undoubtedly retrieve her property when she remembered its existence. But something about the situation nagged at his consciousness, a pattern recognition algorithm firing at the edges of his awareness, suggesting connections he couldn't quite process. Perhaps it was the way she'd glanced back at her chair as she'd left, a movement so subtle another species might have missed it entirely. Or maybe it was the fact that someone competent enough to negotiate trade agreements spanning multiple star systems seemed unlikely to simply forget basic weather protection equipment. The afternoon session reconvened with its usual ceremony. Representatives filed back into their designated positions, while the rain continued its steady percussion against the station's hull. The human delegation returned in their characteristic flurry of organized chaos, the negotiator once again taking her position with that same predatory grace. She looked genuinely surprised to find her umbrella still sitting beside her chair. "Ooh," she said, and Helix 7's auditory processors registered what humans called embarrassment in her tone. "I can't believe I left that behind." But as she reached for the umbrella, her eyes met his across the chamber, and for just a moment, Helix 7's pattern recognition systems registered something that made absolutely no sense at all. She was smiling, not the polite, diplomatic expression humans wore during formal proceedings, but something smaller and more genuine, something that suggested the abandoned umbrella hadn't been forgotten at all, but rather left behind with the same calculated precision she brought to interstellar negotiation. The realization hit his consciousness like a malfunctioning hyperdrive. She had wanted him to notice. More than that, she had wanted him to care enough about her minor equipment failure to actually do something about it. The umbrella wasn't forgotten property. It was some sort of primitive human communication device, a message transmitted through the strategic abandonment of weather protection equipment, which meant, in the twisted logic that governed human social interaction, that she was attempting to initiate what his cultural databases euphemistically called interpersonal contact. With him, Helix 7 processed this information with the kind of methodical horror usually reserved for discovering critical system failures during hyperspace jumps. In all his cycles of diplomatic service, he had never encountered a more illogical, inefficient, or potentially catastrophic method of social engagement. And yet, as the afternoon session droned on with its usual parade of territorial disputes and trade negotiations, he found his attention drifting repeatedly to that simple black umbrella, and the woman who had left it behind. The rain, meanwhile, continued to fall with perfect atmospheric precision, as if the station's environmental systems had developed their own sense of cosmic irony. 3 rotations later, it happened again. Helix 7's memory banks were nothing if not thorough, so when the human negotiator arrived for the weekly Outer Rim Commerce Committee meeting and promptly deposited another umbrella beside her workstation, his analytical subroutines immediately flagged the coincidence. The morning's atmosphere controls had once again defaulted to Earth-normal precipitation patterns, a meteorological decision that the station's crystalline overseers blamed on cascading system preferences, but which everyone suspected was really just the humans bribing the maintenance drones with coffee. This time, the umbrella was blue, navy blue to be precise, with what appered to be a collapsible frame and a handle worn smooth by repeated use. It sat beside her chair with the same air of casual abandonment as its predecessor, as if umbrella abandonment were simply part of standard human diplomatic protocol. The meeting itself followed the usual pattern of bureaucratic futility. The Andromedan Trade Collective wanted exclusive mining rights to 17 asteroid belts. The Beta Centauri Defense League objected on the grounds that 17 was an aesthetically displeasing number, and suggested 16 instead. The humans meanwhile proposed establishing a mutual friendship monitoring station in the disputed territory, apparently believing that calling something friendly would somehow prevent the inevitable armed conflicts over mineral extraction rights. Helix 7 found himself studying the human negotiator with the kind of systematic observation usually reserved for analyzing enemy fleet movement. She sat with perfect diplomatic posture, occasionally making notes on her primitive data tablet, and demonstrated what appeared to be genuine interest in the Andromedan's mining projection. Nothing in her behavior suggested the slightest awareness that she had, once again, abandoned critical weather protection equipment, except for that moment roughly 30 minutes into the proceedings, when she glanced toward her chair with what Helix 7's facial recognition subroutines registered as anticipation, not concern for forgotten property, but something closer to what humans called expectation, as if she were waiting for someone to notice her strategic equipment abandonment. The meeting adjourned with typical diplomatic non-resolution. The Andromedans would submit revised mining proposals. The Beta Centaurians would counter with alternative aesthetic suggestions. The humans would continue believing that friendship could solve problems that had historically required orbital bombardments to resolve. And once again the blue umbrella remained behind. This time, however, Helix 7 was ready. As the chamber emptied in its usual hierarchical procession, he approached the abandoned device with scientific curiosity. The umbrella appeared functional, no obvious structural damage, no atmospheric contamination that might explain its abandonment. By all observable metrics, it was a perfectly adequate piece of weather protection equipment. "Excuse me," came a voice from behind him, and Helix 7's auditory processors registered the distinctive vocal patterns of the human negotiator. She had returned to the chamber with what appeared to be casual timing, though his behavioral analysis algorithms suggested otherwise. "I think I forgot something." She was looking directly at him, not at the umbrella, which suggested that her return had less to do with retrieving forgotten property, and more to do with observing his response to said property's abandonment. "Your weather protection device," Helix 7 replied, gesturing toward the umbrella with the precise economy of movement his species had perfected over millennia. "You appear to have developed a pattern of atmospheric equipment abandonment." Something flickered across her features, surprise perhaps that he had noticed the pattern at all. Then that same small smile from 3 rotations ago, the one that suggested layers of meaning his cultural databases couldn't quite decode. "I guess I'm just forgetful," she said, but her tone carried what humans called irony. She retrieved the umbrella with movements that seemed deliberately unhurried, as if she were providing maximum observation time for his analytical process. "Unlikely," Helix 7 replied, because his behavioral analysis routines had already calculated the statistical probability of random equipment abandonment among competent diplomatic personnel. "Your professional competency ratings suggest exceptional organizational capabilities. The likelihood of repeated accidental abandonment approaches 0.04%. Her smile widened, and for the first time in his diplomatic career, Helix 7 found himself completely unable to process what he was observing. His cultural databases contained extensive files on human facial expressions, but none adequately explained the combination of amusement and something else. Satisfaction, perhaps, that her features currently displayed. "Maybe I just wanted to see if anyone would notice," she said, and then departed the chamber with that same predatory grace, leaving Helix 7 to contemplate the implications of her statement. Over the following rotations, the pattern not only continued, but escalated with what could only be described as systematic precision. Umbrella abandonment occurred exclusively during meetings where Helix 7 was present. When he attended the Mineral Rights Arbitration Committee, she left behind a green umbrella,
During the Cultural Exchange Protocol review, it was read. The Diplomatic Immunity Standards meeting featured what appeared to be a vintage Earth umbrella, with wooden handle and manual opening mechanism. Each abandonment was followed by her eventual return to retrieve the device, and each retrieval involved increasingly extended conversations about weather patterns, atmospheric control systems, and the peculiar human attachment to precipitation-based nostalgia. Other species began to notice. The human female appears to be malfunctioning, observed Crystalline Prime, during a recess in the Trade Route Security Council. Her equipment retention protocols are clearly degraded. Perhaps it's a primitive mating displays, suggested Hive Node 7, with the casual cruelty typical of collective consciousness species. Earth mammals are known for elaborate courtship rituals, involving property exchange. Helix 7's processing cores experienced what could only be described as a computational hiccup. The possibility that umbrella abandonment constituted some form of species-specific social signaling had occurred to him, but he had dismissed it as statistically unlikely. Humans, despite their reputation for emotional chaos, were generally straightforward in their diplomatic communication. But as he analyzed the accumulated data, the precise timing of abandons, the strategic retrieval conversations, the way her optical sensors seemed to track his movements during meetings, a disturbing conclusion began to emerge. She wasn't just abandoning umbrellas, she was abandoning umbrellas specifically, for him to notice, with the apparent expectation that he would eventually do something about it. The realization struck his consciousness, with the force of a failed hyperspace calculation. He was being courted, through strategic equipment abandoned, by a species that had somehow convinced the galactic community to take them seriously, despite communicating romantic interest through the systematic neglect of weather protection devices.
The Battle of the Nexus Point was supposed to be the war to end all wars, which was ironic considering the participants had been saying that about every major engagement for the past 3 millennia. This time, however, all three factions had decided to converge on a strategically worthless system that contained nothing more valuable than some particularly scenic gas giants and a collection of asteroids that looked vaguely insulting when viewed from certain angles. Hayes watched the preliminary maneuvers from the bridge of the Persistence, positioned at what should have been a safe distance from the impending carnage. Around him, his crew monitored the most impressive display of organized stupidity in galactic history. Hegemony forces are taking standard formation Alpha 7, reported Briggs, his voice carrying the weary professionalism of someone who had seen this exact show far too many times. Crystal Lord Refraction of Divine Purpose is broadcasting the usual pre-battle speech about purifying the galaxy through superior harmonic resonance. Collective swarm ships are deploying in pattern designation Writhing Doom Spiral number 46, added. The hive mind appears to be very excited about the prospect of converting enemy biomass into artistic interpretations of victory. And the Dominion? Hayes asked, though he could probably recite their opening moves from memory. Energy Marshal Luminous Inevitability is preparing the traditional speech about ascending to higher planes of existence, while simultaneously reducing their enemies to component particles, Commander Park reported. I believe we're up to speech variation number 2007. Hayes nodded, making final adjustments to his carefully prepared plan. Over the past month, the human fleet had been making subtle modifications to their ships, supposedly to improve their cleanup efficiency. In reality, they'd been preparing for this moment, the opportunity to do something that none of the great galactic powers had attempted in 3,000 years, something completely unpredictable. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes, he broadcast over the human fleet communication. Operation Hold My Beer is a go. The response from his captains was immediate and unanimous, a chorus of barely suppressed laughter mixed with the kind of determined professionalism that had carried humanity through everything from world wars to accidentally colonizing planets that turned to be inhabited by giant space squids with strong opinions about property law. The battle began exactly as Hayes had predicted. The hegemony opened with a massive barrage of crystalline harmony cannons, their weapons creating geometric patterns of destruction that would have been beautiful if they weren't designed to convert matter into its component atoms, while humming in B-flat major. The collective responded with their traditional swarm tactics, releasing clouds of bioships that moved like a three-dimensional murmuration of starlings. If starlings were the size of battleships and equipped with acid-spitting organs, the Dominion phased into reality with their usual flair for dramatic timing, their energy weapons creating light shows that probably violated several laws of physics and at least one local noise ordinance. For approximately 17 minutes, it proceeded exactly like every other major engagement of the past 3 millennia. Then the humans decided to join the party. The UEO's Ingenuity was the first to make contact, emerging from behind an asteroid with all the stealth of a freight train painted in fluorescent colors. Instead of weapons, however, it was broadcasting something that made every sensor array in the system suddenly develop what could only be described as electronic hiccups. What are they transmitting? Bared in crystal Lord refraction of divine purpose, his harmonious voice developing an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty. His tactical officer paused, consulting readings that clearly made no sense, a collection of primitive audio frequencies combined with mathematical equations and what our computers are identifying as recipes for baked goods. What the hegemony's sophisticated analysis systems had failed to recognize was that the humans were broadcasting the opening chords of Welcome to the Jungle, combined with the blueprints for their ship modifications and instructions for making chocolate chip cookies. It was, Hayes had realized, the perfect way to introduce themselves to civilizations that had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of predictable warfare. The effect was immediate and profound. Hegemony crystal arrays, which operated on precise harmonic frequencies, suddenly found themselves trying to process input that included both Guns N' Roses and detailed schematics for jury-rigged tractor beam array. Their weapons systems designed for elegant mathematical precision essentially threw the equivalent of an electronic tantrum and started firing at random. The collective fared no better. Their bioships, evolved for perfect coordination within predetermined parameters, encountered human modifications that included everything from agricultural fertilizer used as improvised explosives, to coffee makers repurposed as short-range communication array. The hive mind's careful tactical algorithms suddenly found themselves trying to process the concept of percussive maintenance, applied to quantum tunneling drive. The Dominion's energy beings discovered that their carefully calibrated reality disruption fields became significantly less stable when exposed to human engineering, which apparently operated on the principle that anything worth doing was worth overdoing, preferably with spare parts and a generous application of optimism. "Sir," called out Yates, monitoring the tactical display with obvious delight, "all 3 fleets are showing massive system failure. The hegemony's formation is completely broken. The collective swarms are flying in random patterns, and the Dominion ships keep phasing in and out of existence whether they want to or not." Hayes nodded, watching as 3 of the galaxy's most advanced military forces suddenly found themselves dealing with the one thing their technology had never been designed to handle: complete and utter improvisation. "Now for Phase 2, he announced. "All ships begin salvage and assistance operations." This was the part that Hayes was particularly proud of. While the alien fleet struggled with system failures caused by exposure to aggressively practical human engineering, the human cleanup crews swooped in with their modified cargo vessels and began doing what they did best: fixing things. Hegemony crystal ships found their harmonic resonance chambers cleared of interference by human engineers who treated million-year-old crystalline technology like particularly finicky car engines. Collective bioships discovered that their evolutionary algorithms worked much better after human technicians applied the time-honored technique of turning it off and on again, but with more chemical compounds and less regard for manufacturer warranty. Dominion energy vessels were stabilized using modified containment fields that were held together with determination, spare parts, and what appeared to be several meters of high-grade electrical tape. "Admiral," came Commander Davis's voice over the comm, "we're getting gratitude transmissions from all 3 fleets. Apparently we just solved technical problems that their best engineers have been working on for centuries. Using what methods? Standard human approach. Hit it with a wrench, try a different frequency, add more power, and when all else fails, ask someone who's actually worked with the equipment instead of just designed it." Hayes watched as the 3 great fleets slowly reformed their battle lines, their weapons and systems now functioning better than they had in decades, thanks to human intervention. For a moment he thought they might actually resume their ancient conflict. Then something unprecedented happened. The 3 fleet commanders opened a joint communication channel. Human admiral of surprising competence,
came the harmonious voice of Crystal Lord Refraction of Divine Purpose. The hegemony acknowledges that your species possesses certain practical skill. The collective agrees, added the biochemical translation of the hive mind's communication. Human approaches to problem-solving show remarkable effectiveness despite apparent primitive origin. The Dominion concurs, said Energy Marshal Luminous Inevitability, his words crackling with barely contained energy. Your methods, while unorthodox, have achieved results that our most advanced technologies could not accomplish. Hayes took a deep breath, realizing that this was the moment everything changed. Gentlemen, he said using a term that probably didn't apply to crystalline beings, hive minds or energy creatures but somehow felt appropriate. I think it's time we discussed a new arrangement. The Battle of the Nexus Point ended not with victory for any of the three great powers, but with the galaxy's first four-way peace negotiation conducted by beings who had just learned that sometimes the best solution to an ancient problem was to ask the janitor. 6 months later, Admiral Hayes stood in what had once been the Galactic Council's emergency session chamber, watching three of the universe's most advanced civilizations argue about the proper maintenance schedule for their newly integrated defense system. It was, he reflected, probably the most civilized disagreement the galaxy had witnessed in 3 millennia. The crystalline matrices require harmonic recalibration every 47 standard cycles. Crystal Lord Prism of Infinite Wisdom was explaining to his counterparts, his faceted form casting rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. This is fundamental resonance theory, established over millions of years of refinement. The bio-neural networks disagree, responded the collective's representative, a writhing mass of interconnected organisms that had learned to communicate through surprisingly polite biochemical emission. Organic systems require adaptive maintenance based on environmental conditions, not arbitrary temporal interval. Both approaches lack sufficient understanding of energy matrix degradation patterns, interjected Energy Marshal Luminous Inevitability, his form crackling with what Hayes had learned to recognize as the Dominion equivalent of mild frustration. Quantum coherence operates according to probability cascades, not predetermined schedules. Hayes cleared his throat, a sound that had somehow become the unofficial signal for the humans. Have a practical suggestion. In galactic diplomatic circles, why don't we just check them when they need checking, he offered. Run diagnostics, look for problems, fix what's broken. You know, standard maintenance protocol. The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for moments when someone had said something either profoundly wise or spectacularly stupid, and nobody was quite sure which. You mean, said Crystal Lord Prism of Infinite Wisdom slowly, reactive maintenance based on actual system performance rather than theoretical optimization schedule. Revolutionary, breathed the collective's representative. Their biochemical signature shifting to what Hayes had learned indicated excitement. Maintenance protocols based on observable reality rather than predetermined algorithms. Unprecedented, agreed Energy Marshal Luminous Inevitability. A completely novel approach to system management. Hayes managed to keep a straight face, though privately he wondered how civilizations capable of reshaping matter at the quantum level had somehow missed the concept of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The truth was, the past 6 months had been a crash course in galactic psychology for everyone involved. The three great powers had spent so long perfecting their technologies that they'd forgotten the basic principle of actually using them effectively. They'd created systems so sophisticated that they required teams of specialists just to operate, so elegant that any deviation from standard parameters caused catastrophic failures, and so advanced that they'd become completely inflexible. Humanity, meanwhile, had built their entire civilization around the assumption that everything would break eventually and need to be fixed by whoever happened to be available at the time. Their approach to technology was essentially controlled chaos, held together by ingenuity, determination, and the occasional strategic application of percussive maintenance. It turned out that controlled chaos was exactly what a stagnant galaxy needed. The Terran maintenance protocols have been implemented across all three fleets, reported Commander Davis, from his new position as Director of Interspecies Technical Support, a job title that probably would have been incomprehensible 6 months ago. System efficiency is up an average of 37%, breakdown rates are down 62%, and we've only had to use the emergency duct tape supplies twice this month. Excellent, Hayes replied, reviewing the latest reports from across the galaxy. The war was over, not through conquest or defeat, but through the simple expedient of making all three factions' military technology actually work properly. It was difficult to maintain ancient grudges when your former enemies kept showing up to fix your computers and optimize your energy matrix. The political transformation had been equally dramatic. The Galactic Council, previously a ceremonial body that existed mainly to provide neutral ground for the three powers to insult each other, had been restructured into something resembling a functional government. The hegemony contributed their mastery of large-scale organization, the collective offered their expertise in resource management, and the Dominion provided their understanding of energy systems and quantum mechanics. Humanity contributed the revolutionary concept of asking, what if we tried something different? Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Briggs from the communication station, we're getting reports from the Outer Rim territory. Apparently there's some kind of dispute between the Crystalline Mining Consortium and the local biofarming collectives over territorial rights to a disputed asteroid field. Hayes sighed. Peace, as it turned out, came with its own set of problems. Instead of cleaning up after massive interstellar battles, the human fleet now found themselves mediating disputes over mining rights, agricultural boundaries, and trade route regulation. It was in many ways significantly more complicated than their previous job of sweeping up debris and preventing alien technology from exploding. On the other hand, nobody was shooting at them anymore, which Hayes considered a marked improvement. Dispatch the UES Ingenuity to investigate, he ordered. Standard diplomatic protocols. If anyone starts shooting, remind them that we're the people who fix their weapons when they break. Hayes looked out at the bustling activity of the council chamber, where representatives from dozens of species worked together on problems that would have been impossible to solve under the old system. The hegemony's perfectionism balanced the collective's adaptability, while the Dominion's theoretical knowledge was tempered by human pragmatism. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a working one, which Hayes had learned was often more valuable than perfection. The galaxy had learned, somewhat to its surprise, that sometimes the most important person in the room was the one who knew how to fix things when they broke, and sometimes the smallest players could change the entire game, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but simply by asking why everyone was playing by the same rules that hadn't worked for 3,000 years. Hayes smiled watching alien civilizations cooperate on projects that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. They still called humans the maintenance crew, but now it was said with respect rather than condescension. After all, in a galaxy full of complicated problems, everybody needed someone who knew how to fix things.